This section should serve as a visceral, shocking opening, adhering to the immediate, visceral imagery that shocks requirement. It will describe a scene without naming the subject, focusing on the sensory details of the final moments of a powerful figure reduced to agony. The narrative will describe the scent of decay not from a tomb, but from a living mouth. It details the throbbing, unbearable pain of a jaw riddled with infection. A pain that no divine pronouncement or royal power could quell. It will pose a direct question to the audience. Can you imagine ruling the world, being called a living god, only for your final defining battle to be against the rot in your own teeth? This sets the central mystery. Who was this person, and how did their story end here? And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. That agonizing, undignified end we witnessed was never supposed to be possible, because the man who suffered it was officially more than a man. To understand how a living god could rot from the inside out, you have to travel back to the very beginning, 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. When the idea of the divine king was first forged in the blood and sand of a newly unified Egypt, this wasn't just a political change, it was a cosmic one. The ruler became Horus on earth, a physical vessel of the gods whose perfection and health guaranteed the rising of the sun and the flooding of the Nile. The king's body was the state, and the state had to be perfect. But how did they understand that body? A document, hidden for millennia, gives us a shocking insight. It's not a religious text, it's a medical field manual. The Edwin Smith Papyrus. Forget spells and magic. Picture this: a physician leaning over a soldier with a shattered skull, and instead of chanting, he makes the first ever written observation of the glistening surface of the human brain. He describes stitching a gaping wound closed with a needle and thread, a brutally practical approach to trauma. This is a mind that is rational, observational, and terrifyingly modern. But this is where their clinical gaze becomes so unsettling. For nearly a third of the cases listed, the prognosis is simple and chilling. An ailment not to be treated. No comfort, no prayers. It's a cold calculation that if the human machine is too broken, it is to be discarded. This wasn't just medicine, it was a system of quality control. And this ruthless obsession with physical perfection, this willingness to set aside the broken, would soon be applied on a scale the world had never seen. They were about to take this ideal of a perfect body and build an eternal one out of stone, a monument to defy death itself. But they were about to learn that the cost of perfection is always paid in blood and flesh, and so they began the most audacious construction project in human history. You have to understand, they weren't just building a tomb. In their minds, they were building an engine, a machine of stone and mathematics designed to overcome death itself and launch the soul of their perfect god-king into the stars. The result was a man-made mountain, the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure so vast it would remain the tallest thing on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons, stacked nearly 500 feet into the desert sky. But the size, as unbelievable as it is, isn't the most disturbing part. It's the precision. Modern analysis reveals a level of accuracy that simply shouldn't be possible. Imagine a base covering 13 acres and making it perfectly level to within the width of your thumb. Imagine aligning that entire mass to true north more accurately than many modern buildings with all our technology. The gleaming white casing stones that once covered it were cut and fitted with joints so fine less than half a millimeter that you couldn't slide a razor blade between them. This is the work of gods, a statement of absolute perfection. Except it wasn't. This divine precision was purchased with a very human hell. The evidence found in the nearby workers' village tells the real story. A story written in skeletons with compressed vertebrae, fractured limbs, and lives spent hauling multi-ton blocks under a relentless Sunday. It was the ultimate expression of their core belief. The divine ideal was worth any price in flesh and bone. They had created a perfect monument for a perfect God, a symbol of a flawless, divinely ordered system. But what happens when the human cogs in that perfect machine begin to grind to a halt? What happens when they get hungry? For the first time in history, we're about to hear their voices. And what they have to say will shake the very foundations of this kingdom. That question, what happens when the people get hungry, is answered in a place the pharaohs never wanted you to see. Not a gilded temple, but a village of dust and stone called Deir el-Medina, a state-built town hidden away in the Theban hills. This was the home of the tomb builders, the elite artisans who carved out and secretly decorated the eternal resting places of the gods in the Valley of the Kings. They knew the state's most vital secrets, and because they were literate, they kept records. Meticulous, daily accounts of their work, their quarrels, and their breaking points. One document, a papyrus that survived by sheer chance, records an event so shocking, so disruptive to the divine order, it was clearly never meant to be remembered. It's the account of the world's first ever recorded labor strike. The year is around 1152 BCE, during the reign of Ramesses III. The state bureaucracy, bloated and corrupt, has failed to deliver the workers' wages a specific, promised ration of grain. So they do the unthinkable. They put down their chisels and brushes and walk off the job. The scribe Amenacht records their protest, quoting their exact words as they march on the mortuary temples. And for the first time, the raw, unfiltered voice of the common man cuts through the official history. It's not a prayer, it's a demand. "We are hungry," they shouted. "For 18 days have passed this month." This was more than a pay dispute. It was the first crack in the wall of absolute authority, a visceral reminder that the entire divine system rested on a foundation of human need. The perfect machine was failing, and this failure was just a symptom of a much deeper sickness. While the workers starved, the royal family was practicing its own dark tradition to keep its power absolute, a tradition that was poisoning the very bloodline of the gods themselves. That dark tradition, that sickness festering within the royal bloodline, remained one of history's most closely guarded secrets for over 3,000 years. Instead, the world was given a different story. A dazzling spectacle of wealth and power crystallized in the tomb of a single king. In 1922, the archaeologist Howard Carter breached a sealed doorway, held up a candle, and uttered the immortal words, "Yes, wonderful things." He had stumbled upon an intact royal burial from the peak of Egypt's power, unleashing a global frenzy for a forgotten boy king, Tutankhamun. And at the heart of that frenzy was one object that has defined our vision of ancient Egypt ever since: the solid gold death mask. It is the very image of divine perfection, the flawless golden skin, the serene, all-powerful gaze, the Neme's headdress and false beard, signifying eternal godhood. This was the story the tomb was built to tell. The art on the walls and the objects packed within showed a vigorous, athletic pharaoh. Here he is, the mighty hunter, riding a chariot at full speed. Here he is again, the great warrior, single-handedly conquering Egypt's enemies. This was the myth, the carefully crafted propaganda of a perfect ruler from a golden age, designed to project an image of unshakable strength. But it was a lie. A desperate, glittering lie designed to cover up a horrifying truth. For beneath that golden mask lay not a god, but a broken boy, and the gold hid a much darker secret, a sickness that had been festering in the royal bloodline for generations. And the forensic evidence is nothing short of grotesque. For nearly a century, the world was content with the myth. But in 2010, science finally gave us a way to look beneath the gold. In an unprecedented move, a team of researchers put Tutankhamun's fragile mummy through a CT scanner and, for the first time, extracted his royal DNA. This newly discovered evidence doesn't just add to the story, it shatters it. This is the autopsy of a god. The first revelation is in his feet. The scans show a severe deformity, a pronounced clubfoot. The bones in his arch were necrotic, literally dead tissue, a condition that would have left him in constant, agonizing pain. And suddenly, a bizarre detail from Howard Carter's excavation made horrifying sense. the 130 walking canes found scattered throughout the tomb. They weren't just ceremonial. He physically could not walk without them. But it gets worse. The DNA tells us he suffered from a genetic bone disease, weakening his entire skeleton. And inside his tissue, scientists found the clinching piece of evidence: the DNA of Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest malaria parasite known to man. So, let's create the real picture. Forget the golden mask. Forget the chariot-riding warrior. The forensic truth is of a severely disabled young man, hobbling on a deformed foot, his brittle bones aching, his body racked with the fever and chills of chronic malaria. The strong, perfect pharaoh was a lie. He was a frail, sickly, and broken boy. And this cascade of horrific ailments wasn't bad luck. It was the direct result of a royal obsession. A tradition so dark it was poisoning the divine bloodline from within. The cause of his suffering was engineered by his own family, and it's written in the code of his DNA. That question, how a family engineers the sickness of its own son, has an answer that is both simple and profoundly disturbing. To keep their divine bloodline pure, to hoard power and divinity, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom practiced a tradition that most human cultures instinctively recoil from. From their cosmic perspective, it was logical. If you are a living god, your only equal is another god. The purest partner was your own sister, or even your daughter. For generations, they passed the crown and the scepter from brother to sister, believing they were perfecting their divinity, creating a lineage of perfect beings. In reality, they were playing a desperate game of genetic roulette, and the results were catastrophic. For decades, Tutankhamun's parentage was debated, but the 2010 DNA analysis provided the final, irrefutable proof. The tests confirmed his father was the pharaoh Akhenaten, and his mother, the scientists discovered, was one of Akhenaten's own biological sisters. Tutankhamun was the son of a brother and sister. And with that one fact, the entire golden myth unravels. His clubfoot, his brittle bones, his compromised immunity. These weren't a curse. They were the predictable biological consequences of intensive inbreeding. The royal family had turned so far inward, so obsessed with its own purity, that it had begun to quite literally devour itself. And this is a perfect, horrifying metaphor for the empire itself. A system so fixated on its own divine image that it was blind to the profound sickness festering at its very heart. But after the brief, painful reign of this broken boy, Egypt would recover. It would rise to its greatest heights of power under a new dynasty, culminating in a ruler who would become the very definition of a god on earth, Ramesses the Great. He would project an image of virility and strength for an incredible 66 years. But the enemy that had broken Tutankhamun hadn't gone away. It had just been waiting. And so, the empire put its faith in a new kind of pharaoh. A warrior, a master builder, and an absolute genius of propaganda, Ramesses II. A name that would echo through history as Ramesses the Great. For 66 years, he waged a relentless campaign to carve his own divinity into the very stone of Egypt, creating an image of power so absolute it has shaped our view of his civilization ever since. Go to Egypt today, and you are walking through the world he built. You see his 4 colossal statues at Abu Simbel, a permanent act of divine intimidation. You see his victory reliefs from the Battle of Kadesh, where he depicts himself as a lone superhero, single-handedly crushing the Hittite army. He fathered over 100 children, the ultimate symbol of virility. His body was perfect, his power was eternal, his victory was assured. That was the official story. But in 1976, his mummy was flown to Paris for an unprecedented scientific intervention, and for the first time, experts could conduct a forensic examination of the greatest pharaoh in history. The body they uncovered did not match the legend. The first clue was in his bones. Expert analysis revealed a severe case of ankylosing spondylitis, a crippling form of arthritis that slowly, painfully fuses the spine. For the final decades of his life, Ramesses the Great, the mighty warrior, would have been in chronic, agonizing pain. His back bent into a permanent, stooped posture. The man who portrayed himself as a giant on temple walls couldn't even stand up straight. But as horrifying as that is, this disease wasn't what killed him. The scientists in Paris found something else, an infection that points to his final undignified battle. A slow, septic decay that proves even a living god can be consumed from the inside out. That final, undignified battle, the one that truly defined the end of Ramesses the Great, wasn't fought with swords and shields. It was fought in the dark, septic confines of his own mouth. When the scientists in Paris examined the pharaoh's jaw, they uncovered a scene of biological carnage. The forensic report is a horror story written in clinical language. It details teeth worn down to the pulp, exposing the raw nerves to the grit and sand of an Egyptian diet. This constant irritation led to a cascade of infections, creating multiple severe dental abscesses, festering pockets of pus and bacteria eating directly into his jawbone. We cannot overstate the agony. This wasn't a toothache. It was a constant, throbbing sepsis. A foul taste of decay that no amount of royal incense could mask. An infection like that is a ticking time bomb. The bacteria leach from the decaying bone into the bloodstream, triggering a systemic infection. Sepsis, a slow, agonizing poisoning from within that leads to fevers, organ failure, and a miserable death. This is the great irony, the ultimate hypocrisy of pharaonic power. Here was a man who carved his face onto mountains, whose monuments were designed to last for eternity, who commanded armies and called himself a living god. And yet, for all his power, he was brought down by the same filthy, wretched infection that could kill any common beggar. He could defeat the Hittite Empire, but he couldn't defeat the bacteria breeding in his own jaw. This was his true final enemy. A microscopic invader that proved, once and for all, that the story of power written in stone is a lie. The real story is written in our own fragile, decaying flesh. So, in the end, what is the true history of Egypt? Is it the one they carved for us in stone? A majestic story of invincible pharaohs, triumphant battles, and eternal monuments to the gods? Or is it the secret history that modern forensics has finally allowed us to read? A story whispered from the grave, written in twisted spines, brittle bones, and the septic decay in a king's jaw. The official record is a history of external threats of wars against the Hittites and invasions by the Sea Peoples. But the forensic record reveals that the greater, more relentless war was the one fought on the inside. It was a war against parasites, against genetic decay, and against the agonizing, inevitable failure of the human body. And this suggests a far more disturbing truth about the nature of power. We think the story of a civilization is the story of what it builds, but maybe the real story is in how it rots. The true weakness wasn't a foreign army at the gates. It was the sickness in the royal bloodline. It was the bacteria breeding in the mouth of a god. The ultimate, undefeated enemy of Egypt wasn't another empire. It was biology. And that is their final, haunting lesson to us. We gaze at their pyramids and golden masks and see a civilization of immortals. But their bones force us to see ourselves. They remind us that every kingdom, every monument, every claim to power is built upon the same fragile, aching, and temporary foundation. The human body, the dust of their empire, is a warning written in the dust of our own skeletons. No matter how high we build our walls, we can never escape the enemy already inside.